Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, and welcome to our Value Chain Innovation Speaker Series. My name is Barchi Gilai, and I'm the Associate Director of the Value Chain Innovation Initiative at Stanford Graduate School of Business. We're excited to host today Joe McMorrow, who is the Vice President of Supply Chain Transformation at Cisco. McMorrow leads a global team focused on driving supply chain strategy and execution to ensure a secure, adaptable, and sustainable supply chain. In today's event, McMorrow will provide an overview of Cisco's supply chain transformation journey and discuss key use cases that illustrate how the company is leveraging AI across its operations. He will also talk about the evolution of generative AI applications at Cisco and provide his perspective on their current and future role in supply chain operations. Moderating the discussion is Haim Mendelson, who is a professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the faculty director of the Value Chain Innovation Initiative. And now I'm delighted to hand things over to Professor Haim Mendelson.
Hey, thank you very much, Barchi. It's always a pleasure to talk about Cisco, which is a company that was conceived in the basement of Stanford's computer science department. And it is a particular pleasure to have Joe with us today. Joe, the floor, or actually the screen, is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Haim and Barchi, for the opportunity here to join you all and share what we've been doing here with at Cisco. So as Barchi had identified, right, I'm going to talk a little bit about who Cisco is. I don't think Cisco really needs a huge introduction from the audience, especially those that are in the Bay Area. I'm going to talk a bit about supply chain at Cisco and an overview of who we are, how we're structured. And then I'm also going to talk a bit about our transformation journey and how we set strategy. Most of the time, though, today we'll be focused on our AI use cases. And then also I'll end talking about how we're thinking about the application of GenAI, what we've learned with GenAI over the last year and a half since its emergence, and some of the early successes we've seen here with its application. So Cisco, starting here. So yes, it was conceived in the basement of Stanford many years ago. It was actually 40 years ago Cisco was founded. It was December 1984, and so we just celebrated our 40th anniversary. So I guess that would mean we're old tech in Silicon Valley. We're considered old tech. But Cisco is seeing really like a rebirth and a growth and a lot of excitement around Cisco right now, where our stock has just recently hit a 25-year high. We are a company seen as one that can help for this AI build out and getting companies prepared to take advantage of this emergence of AI and applying AI to the work we do within industry and within our enterprises. And with that too, it's been core to Cisco's strategy to make sure that we can build not just really great networking and compute infrastructure, but we can do it in a secure way. And Cisco is really in a great situation right now, great position to be able to provide secure workloads and secure networks to enterprises that want to go off and adopt AI in their operations. I think we all know that AI has a ton of great value and benefit, but also there's a lot of risk involved. Risk with exposure of your IP. And the hackers are getting better, and AI is helping the hackers get better. And so we need to stay ahead of that. And that's a big driver to why we made the biggest acquisition to date in our company's history. We bought Splunk for $28 billion. Those of you that know who Splunk is, they're a leader in full stack observability. And that's a huge capability to be able to extend and build into our core applications and our core systems in switching and routing and compute. Finally, I would be amiss if I didn't say that we are constantly focused on adapting to and staying ahead of the geopolitical trends, whether it be tariffs or insights into full material disclosure, understanding countries of origins for rare earth elements. These are things that right now have been front and center. They're front and center for risk management. They're front and center for us also for just being sustainable and making sure we have purpose in everything we do. And so that's another huge focus. I'll touch on that here too in just a minute. So that's a little bit about Cisco. Now for supply chain, we are a global supply chain team. We manage all of the hardware for Cisco systems. There's about a little more than 3,000 people that are in supply chain at Cisco, but there's 10x that in our manufacturing partner and logistics network and repair network ecosystem. We're an outsourced manufacturing strategy supply chain. And so we work with an ecosystem of manufacturing partners to actually build and ship our product every day. But those facilities are dedicated to Cisco and Cisco product. And you can see by some of the volumes here, they would have to be dedicated given the kind of vast amount of product that we build, very broad and diverse product portfolio, and we have a global install base that we have to service. Now, how we're structured as an organization, if for those of you that are supply chain people, you've heard of the supply chain operations reference model, or SCORE. And so you can see plan, source, make, deliver here embedded in our functional construct. We are a functionally aligned organization, and so Innovate focuses on product development, new product introduction, product lifecycle management. Planning is just that, sourcing, supplier management. You've got manufacturing, which is that outsourced manufacturing, inventory management. Then you've got quality, which is product quality, field quality, as well as test within our factories, logistics and warehousing, and then in service operations, because again, we have this massive install base that we have to service. And kind of a really good, interesting point here about services. So, we as a company are very focused on circularity and our impact on the environment. And so we actually harvest about half of the spares we put in our install base to service our install base. We harvest about half of those spares from returned product that gets returned back to Cisco. We repair it, we put it back out in the field. And so that's a commitment we have, that's just not to the environment, but also it's good business sense as well, right? To make good use of that high value inventory that was returned. My organization here is supply chain transformation, like we talked about. So I'm responsible for strategy. Any new deal that has hardware involved, my team leads the mergers and acquisitions integration of that into our business. I've got responsibility for supply chain security, risk management, sustainability, which I've talked about here a couple of times already, and supply chain systems. And so our team leads these kind of large cross-functional transformations, these programs. One of those programs, too, again, has been this focus on driving AI adoption and embedding AI into everything we do. So I want to also touch just a bit on, I touched about our structure, how we're organized as a team. Each one of those pillars, plan, source, make, deliver there that I talked about before, I have a peer that I work with that owns each of those functional teams. But because our product portfolio is so big and our scope is so large, we actually have segmented operating models that help us manage different classes or groups of products that we build, as well as customers or segments that we manage. So one, for example, is our core product line, which is our configure-to-order products. Cisco is a configure-to-order company. We basically build per customer order. A majority, if you can see, $40+ billion of our revenue is configure-to-order product. So only about 1/10 of our product portfolio is built to stock. These are the lower end products, simpler hardware products. For those of you that are familiar with our Meraki line, which is our cloud-based networking solution, the cloud-based software and that network is the differentiator. The hardware is not as much so. And so those are simpler build to stock products. We put those in warehouses. We can ship them same or next day. Configure to order is not. It's 7 to even up to 21 or 30-day lead time. In the last 10 years, we spent other acquisitions and internal organic development that we've done internally. We've been investing significantly in our component sub-tier, specifically with semiconductors and optics. We actually have a feeder supply chain that feeds our configure to order and built to stock products. We manage specifically down to the foundry and OSAT level, and design our own lasers and optical modules. We control that supply chain. That's us controlling our destiny, because that's really core IP to our hardware. It helps us also control cost, maintain security, and quality by actually having that. So having our own semiconductor and optics is really a differentiated value that Cisco can provide. And then finally, I mentioned Cisco services. So there's an entire Cisco services supply chain that are configured to order and fast fulfillment supply chains are feeders to that services supply chain. What's not harvested from returned parts is made new. And our supply chain replenishes those service depots we have worldwide. Talking about strategy, and I touched on geopolitics here very quickly, but we go through a really comprehensive strategic process each year, and we refresh it about mid-cycle. But essentially, what our team does is we go off and we look and assess how these 10 different forces or these 10 different categories could have an impact on our priorities. What are the things that are most top of mind for us, and what should we be focusing on as an organization? Either investments in people, technology, business processes, systems to support those processes. And you can see here each of these different 10 areas, some of which are more top of mind than others. I talked about geopolitics again in the very beginning. The economy is obviously a major concern as we think about the impact of inflation or the consistent levels of cash and availability of cash and the cost of borrowing, all the way to what are our competitors doing. So these are forces we look at as an organization. We go through a strategic process each year, once again, to establish what are those things that really are having an impact on our business. What are those things we need to stay ahead of? And so that results in these are our strategic priorities. And so as an organization, once we go through and do that landscape assessment or kind of global environmental scan, as we call it, we then arrive at, okay, so what are those core strategies we're going to get after? These are our strategies. They're growth, adaptability, and innovation. And this is really supporting Cisco's growth and scaling new products and technology into new markets. If you've heard Cisco's earnings the last couple of years, we've been increasingly become a bigger player in the web scale market. We've become a bigger player, and they've become a larger customer segment for us, a growing segment. Obviously, the build out of AI data centers for enterprise, secure AI data centers for enterprise is another big growing segment for us. And so this is how, as an organization, we're thinking about what do we need to do effectively to drive that profitable top line growth for Cisco. Adaptability is something that we've been focusing on for a very long time. This is essentially adaptability in anything we do, better planning, better response to changes in the market, better effectively manage quality in our factories, be able to move workloads or production capacity to different regions, all of the above, many different things we focus on to make sure that we can adapt to what's happening around us as an organization. And then innovation is another one that we've been focused on for a very long time. This will continue to be a core strategy for us, not just innovation in our products and how we manufacture and technology, but also innovation in processes. And so when I talk about AI today and our ability to adapt AI in everything we do to run the business, that's about process innovation. For years, we talked about things like sustainability as strategies, workforce strategies with people, operational excellence. These have graduated from the strategy category. They've become part of who we are. And so these are foundational to how we operate. And so we don't call them strategies any longer, but we remind ourselves that these are core to who we are. We thrive on operational excellence. We're a purpose-driven organization with everything we do, with responsible sourcing and the impact we have on the environment, and the impact we have on communities. And we're here to develop our people, because without our people, you're only as good as your people, right? And so that has to be an annual focus. So now maybe switching gears a bit, talking about our supply chain transformation journey. We like to go back to about 15 years ago. We had a massive upgrade of our ERP system. We went to a single instance of our ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning Platform. We have one global instance that runs all of our product manufacturing and fulfillment from order booking to accounts receivable that the entire company runs on, one global instance with multiple legal entities structured under it. That in addition to a standard product data management platform for all of our bills of materials and engineering changes, it really marked the beginning of this kind of foundational investment in core systems. Those are our transactional systems, our source of record, our source of truth. As time went on, we continued building around the ERP, as you could think about it, where we started building insights into what was happening out in that extended manufacturing network and that outsourced network. And we did that by ingesting B2B data from our manufacturing partners and suppliers and logistics partners on, progress on delivery or progress on procurement of materials or progress of, WIP in our factories, to make sure that we actually had insights on how the operation was working or how it was operating outside of what was in our immediate control or outside of our core systems, which again is our ERP. Core for really critical for an outsourced model. Then as time went on, we started thinking about, well, I've got all this great data, but I have a lot of manual processes still. And so I want to start to digitize my processes, and I want to take I want to start to drive standardization in my workflows. So workflow standardizations could be things on, how we disposition components incoming to the factory, how I drive to corrective action with a supplier that might have discrepant material in the quality space, maybe how I visualize the inventory or the backlog I have rather for my customers, and what inventory would I peg against that. Those are kind of some examples of some of the digital investments we made. We built kind of digital workflows. It helps us drive efficiency, operational efficiency, connect people more effectively, like outside of email and manual means. But those digital workflows actually create a digital record of the work. And that's really critical as you start to think about this intelligence phase, which is really how we kind of articulate the last 5 or 6 years, where we've started to embed more and more, machine learning to help with decision making. And it's really, you've got to, I think the point here I wanted to make on the slide was that, whether we did it on purpose or not, we 15 years ago focused on systems and core foundation, transactional record, and alignment on source of truth. And that kind of has evolved over time, and we've been building upon that data foundation. I think if you want to drive to an intelligent supply chain or an intelligent operation, anyone who's listening to this, anyone who's been trying to work with AI or AI trained AI models, you need good data. And you can't always fabricate the data, especially if you're trying to make a business decision and there's billions of dollars at stake. You need data to make decisions, and you need data to train models. And so I think huge lesson learned is without that, you really are going to have a hard time getting good results from the application of AI. So that takes me to kind of the AI applications. And so about 2 years ago, really it was with the emergence of GenAI. My boss at the time said, wow, like I get 7 emails a day pitching a GenAI use case to me, or a company that wants to come and build us a solution. Can we go off and just inventory everything we've done in AI or with AI? And so this is what we did. We went off and connected with each of our core teams. We collected over 150 different use cases. And in our definition, we consider machine learning, the application of machine learning, as AI. GenAI as a type of AI, and these kind of neural networks and deep learning models are amazing, but they're not the end all be all. Machine learning still has a huge place, and I'm going to give a couple examples of both machine learning and GenAI here as we go. So you can see, though, anywhere from product quality, forecasting, product lifecycle management, pretty much across the organization, we had different use cases or different applications of some type of AI. And what we found too, as we went through this, is the teams that have been that are more rooted in statistics, like in our planning team with forecasting or in our quality teams because of things like statistical process control and factories. We had the mind share, we had the skill set there and the available data. And those are the teams that had been the most progressive with AI. And so as we think about tapping into their learnings, their knowledge, and helping them share with other teams, like maybe logistics or maybe in the teams in product development, it's been helpful for us to really get that full sense of what's out there. But we collected so many use cases, we actually had to take a step back and really kind of identify where they are in their journey and what type of AI. So if it's robotic process automation, we'd consider it something like a diagnostic capability. Or you might be at a point where you have an algorithm that can help provide a prediction, and then you're like presenting a scenario to a planner to make a decision with that prediction, or to a quality leader. In some cases, though, we've actually have enough confidence in the outcome that the teams have let the algorithm prescribe the action and then take the action. And then finally, the cognitive category is the one where we assign to GenAI, and this is where we've got an algorithm that can actually actively learn and get better over time, eventually working autonomously. And I'm going to unpack that one a bit more toward the end before we start taking questions. Now I'm going to talk about a couple of the use cases. One of them being in the forecasting space. And so the challenges with forecasting historically have been our forecasting models don't do a good job predicting volatility. And you can see here in this chart, the financial crisis is the big dip in V recovery back in our fiscal year 9. And then you can see COVID as the small dip in massive recovery, with another major drop here in fiscal year 20 through 23. These are things that are very hard to predict. It's very hard to predict the volatility. It's those outside factors external to the outside world, you're outside of your company, that really have the biggest influence on where your bookings are going to come from. And your statistical models, your machine learning, traditional machine learning or SaaS, is going to be looking at patterns of the past. And so those patterns of the past aren't necessarily going to be what will happen in the future, because it's not looking at cause and effect. The other key thing here too, I think planners get impacted by recency bias. And for those of you that are aware of what this is, you basically are more inclined to plan to the things that just recently happened. And so you tend to again get clouded by what's happening right now in the world, or what just happened last quarter, versus again, what are the factors that could cause your plan to look different. So our planning team started working with the company called Causal Lens. They started working with this capability called Causal AI. And Causal AI, like I had mentioned before, instead of just machine learning and looking back at correlation, instead of looking back at patterns of the past, it tries to look at what are those external macro factors. In this case, we look at things like the consumer price index, and we look at the supply chain indexes. We look at sentiment on inflation. We look at interest rates. And we say, okay, how do those things correlate to enterprise bookings, or name the segment, the bookings patterns at Cisco? What the team had done is they actually went back, and this is the segment. This is our enterprise switching segment. Went back to beginning of FY17, and you can see here in the shaded area, they trained this causal model. And they through that training and dialing in the model, they looked at more than a dozen different macro indexes, external indexes, and said, okay, those indexes have the greatest correlation to our bookings patterns. Then they ran the model forward, and this is actual results. And since it's been running in pilot in 21 and 22, and then eventually in full production in the last 2 years, this has actually become one of our highest reliable forecast streams. most accurate forecast streams. We've seen a double-digit increase in forecast accuracy for our enterprise business. For us, that's a $16 billion business. And that's a huge impact on improvement in excess and obsolescence in revenue predictability specifically as a company. So forecasting, causal AI, definitely been an area that we'll continue to invest in. Another one that's maybe just a sort of classic machine learning investments has been in our quality space. And so, you can see here just a very simple picture of our manufacturing, forward material flow. We're purchasing individual components and silicon, we're bringing that in-house. We're collecting information as necessary from our suppliers on their quality results on those devices. And then Cisco has its own test platform. There's a team. The reference in my group around supply chain systems is the team that owns that platform. Essentially, we've got Cisco infrastructure, data centers, and networks deployed in all of our manufacturing and repair sites worldwide that runs a cloud-based test platform. Cisco engineers write test scripts to test our product, and our product does not leave our factories, does not progress in the manufacturing routing unless it meets our test criteria and has been successfully tested. That cloud-based solution also gives us the ability to ingest data real time as product is being built. So we get WIP visibility to where it is in the test steps, but we also get all this great insight and data collected on the product. As products fail in factory, we are able to articulate a failure signature for why it failed. And we've been able to then take that massive data that we collect every day and have visibility into near real time out in the world at our factories. And we're able to do really cool things with it, like early failure sensing, or be able to, help teams do root cause and corrective action assistance in the factory to say, well, based on the types of failures we've seen, what you're seeing right now at this test step, we recommend that you take these actions right here. What we've also done is pushed some of that data, or made some of that data rather, available to our services and repair teams, so that when a customer calls and says, hey, I have this failure in the field, when we get the onboard failure logs back, or our services team gets those onboard failure logs back, we can help troubleshoot that activity because of all this rich data that we've collected in our factories. One of the initial, or one of the major first investments we made with that data is the kind of software versus hardware failure, which has been was perennially like a challenge we had as a company, where hardware was being returned and it was found that it was actually a software problem, not a hardware problem, for why the hardware was experiencing an issue in the field. And so we, through the exposure of this data and getting better predictability to the agents that pick up the phone and work with our customers, we were able to reduce the kind of what we call avoidable RMAs, or avoidable returns, where there's really no trouble found because it was software. We were able to reduce those by double digits, which greatly reduced our warranty expenses as a company. So those are just a couple examples of how we've taken this rich data, the investments we've made in digital platforms, and applied intelligence on top of it. And I'm moving on here, talk a little bit about GenAI. So when we started with GenAI, I think we started where most people did, which was, hey, it's an LLM, it's good at kind of plowing through unstructured text and can really give great summaries to us. Now, I think like most, we went through a RAG approach, retrieval augmented generation approach, to make sure that we can fine tune the model to give us something that makes sense. I show the example here. One of our first use cases has been process control documents. We have hundreds of them, and for most companies, you've got process control documentation. There's an owner. It's a revised document. It's out in a repository somewhere, and no one knows where to find it. And you end up having to ask somebody, how do you do this? And so what we found here is, a very simple GenAI solution with a RAG-based training model, like I've shown here, where you've just walled off that specific data set to interact with, have that open source LLM. You do, again, that domain-specific tuning and make sure that that data set is walled off so you get good results back. And then basically, you're able to say, okay, well, what is the gold board rework policy, or how do I onboard a supplier? And then you can have some confidence that the model is going to go into the specific data set that you told it to go look at, and it's not going to go into the intranet or go off to external sources and give you garbage. And so this is kind of an idea of how can you use GenAI within your company and do it in a way where it can be value add for folks at scale. And this is, again, a solution where it's essentially a chatbot where it can be, accessible in different applications that people use. And again, it's got to be, tuned by domain. Now, another area, though, that we really are excited about with GenAI is how do we start to take these digital workflows that we've built over the years. And the one I'm showing here is really a slide we use to talk about the digital workflow that we've built for our fulfillment operations. And we call it universal fulfillment orchestration because it really orchestrates between many different roles across the supply chain and people that are integral to making sure that we actually meet the promise dates on the orders that we have in our backlog that we need to ship to our customers. And you can see here I've identified a couple core personas that actually use this program or that use this platform, that have core data elements that they own, that this platform ingests to help teams make more informed decisions. And so for us right now, we're thinking, well, how do I take the business logic that we've embedded in this platform where, like, for example, I've got a list of orders and at any one point in time, we've got 150,000 lines of backlog, literally that many lines of backlog. In our ERP system, we're shipping 30,000 orders a week. So how do I scan across all of that data and say which of those orders are at risk of missing their promise date this week? And then based on where that order is in its life cycle, where it is in the factory, what the material availability is there a hold on it, a case notes? Can you give me some indication of if that order is at risk of missing its promise date? That helps the people in the field, at the manufacturing site, in the region, working on a product, kind of cut through that large backlog and say, what are the ones I should be looking at right now? Where should my attention be focused? This, we think, is a great application of GenAI, right? Obviously, there's so much information that needs to be plowed through. And today, we have like a kind of a structured logic that looks at different states of orders. It looks at how long it's been in the step, kind of all the things I mentioned, but it's all hard-coded. And what we've done is we've tried to hard-code that logic to create dashboards and reports or control towers for people to go filter the orders that matter. Right now, we're working on training an agent. We're training a series of agents to start to learn on those patterns, learn why orders have failed in the past, so we can get better at predicting which orders would fail. And that kind of takes me to this next point is that, when we think about evolving GenAI, getting to that final outcome of helping me make better decisions, combination of GenAI, it's going to be GenAI agents leveraging ML. Eventually, when I can trust that the agent or the assistant becoming an agent is good enough, I could have that assistant or agent help a persona, a supply planner, a fulfillment manager, take that action, right? And we can start to drive transactions. Now, we're not there yet. As you can see, we're in proof of concept and pilot phase on that. We haven't let the controls go. Same for augmented decisions using GenAI. We're still in proof of concept mode here. It's not, I wouldn't 100% call it a true agent. Because the complexity here is we're trying to share is, using an LLM to write test code or to have test code become plain English, or like, helping me summarize a document or, a meeting transcript. LLMs are good at that. They're good at that because they're language models. Now, if you want an LLM to go out and, tell me everything about a supplier that I'm going to negotiate with, and I'm pulling a bunch of, this is a kind of external research context, generation kind of level of complexity. If I want to go out there and try to pull things from the public domain, scan for, regulatory new regulations that might impact my company, there's a vast amount of data that you need to be able to kind of parse through, right? You're going to get more garbage if you open the aperture too wide. And then again, finally, if we get to augmented decisions and kind of autonomous orchestration, which is that major or final kind of outcome or vision, you need to be able to have context. You need to be able to give the model context. What does an order that looks like it's going to miss its promise date look like? What's that profile of that order? Now that's us trying to use structured data to train a model. And structured data needs context around it. And so we're talking about investing in semantic layers and taking the logic we've built in these digital platforms, like the one I mentioned, universal fulfillment orchestration, and using that context and that business logic that we've hard coded to help train these models, to pick up those patterns and know which patterns matter. All right, so I am going to stop there and take some questions.
Great. So we have quite a number of questions. And let me start with Cheryl's question. A lot of people today are concerned about tariffs. How do you use AI to plan against tariffs?
Oh my gosh.
In forecasting, scanning, what do you do about that?
That's funny. So, it's AI for tariffs. I think the tariff landscape is changing so fast. There's not like a great, there's either see if I can articulate it clearly. I don't know if there's really much of an AI use case for tariffs at this point in time, right? There's specific HTS classifications and countries of origin for those HTS classifications that have a tariff tag to them. Now, if you've got the master data, if you know who you buy it from, who you buy the components from that you're importing, or you know the content of the material in your product, let's say it's aluminum in Section 232 tariffs. I know how much aluminum I have in my product. I know the country of origin of aluminum. I can then calculate how much I owe the US government for a tariff for something imported with aluminum in it. That's not an AI use case. It's about having the right master data, right? You can't guess how much aluminum's in there or have an algorithm tell you. You need to be more precise than that.
And in forecasting, do you use predictions about tariffs as part of the macro factors?
It's interesting. Our causal models right now, because the last 6 months, the kind of the tariffs on, tariffs off, tariffs high, tariffs low, because of that nature, the macros haven't been something we've been able to effectively train a model on. And so I would say the causal models for forecasting have probably been the least accurate in the last 6 months. And it's actually required some judgment from us to say, yes, the model's predicting a rise in bookings, let's say for enterprise business. However, there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And so we're going to judge that a bit. So causal model is good. But yes, if the macro is changing, it's hard to keep up with the changes. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with less data from the past.
No data from the past, right? Yeah.
Great. We have a number of questions which I'm going to combine that look at the people side of the equation. And some of them are about kind of upscaling people, training people to use GenAI models as opposed to traditional systems. Part of it is, training the data science people versus the business people. Can you speak about this whole area, which is important for everybody?
Sure is. So yeah, that's a great question. So we've looked at the training from a couple different levels. We started with training for our executives. About a year ago, we started a series, like a learning series with our director and above community in supply chain, just to give them exposure to what is Gen AI. Some of the material I shared today, not everyone had seen that. They didn't understand what had been done and what is AI and what's ML and how do you use Gen AI. So we started with the directors because we want the directors to have visibility and the leadership to have visibility to what's possible. Then we really have a couple different learning pathways. There's learning pathways for the data community and the data science community, access to not just which tools and technologies are available for development at Cisco, but also we've built cohorts and communities so people can share what they've done cross-functionally. It's one of the things my data team, my central data team in supply chain transformation does is how do I get that community to talk to each other, learn from one another, right? As well as building data foundation and aligning on taxonomy and data catalog and all those things you need to do to make sure that we're not copying data around and creating different sources of truth. Then there's just the general population. And that's still something for us, it's been more of a work in process is apart from creating someone a tool to use, like a chatbot, like the one I talked about with the process documents, how do I just give people access to GenAI tools? Now, Cisco's made a big investment in an internal platform that uses an OpenAI API, like most companies have done here. But basically, we've built an application into our intranet, or the Cisco Inside website, that's now gives people utilities where they can say, hey, I've got this document I downloaded from a supplier's website, or I've got this this regulatory document. Help me summarize it, and you can ingest that document into just a reader. And so there's that self-service that we've provided for people in a safe way with a secure API. There's tools that we're building for people to help embed them into core processes. Those are some of the things that we've done for the general population. Yeah.
Terrific. We have a number of questions that look into the details of the technology or implementation. And one of them, or a couple of them really, look at reg versus fine-tuning. So how do you actually do that? Do you use open source? I think you use open source, a foundation. Yep. Can you speak to how you think about reg versus fine-tuning and how do you make it happen?
It's interesting. So the LLM obviously is open sourced, but then we're also using vector databases specifically to help with that fine tuning. And so it's getting that kind of core set of information curated and getting that kind of context around the data has been really key. So there's obviously vector involved, and then I think just there's a kind of prompting that needs to be done to make sure that tuning is done appropriately, and getting feedback back to the LLM and it returns a result that isn't what you expected. But it's definitely an evolution to get to that tuning.
There's a couple of questions about the effect of AI on traditional processes. So we have a set of traditional processes that have been fine-tuned in the traditional way over a period of time, and now we have these new technologies that kind of attack them. So how do you think about that?
It's the interesting thing is that a lot of the processes we've built, they're built for reliability, right? I mean, you kind of think about that journey. We've been focused on building control towers and having visibility to massive amounts of data so people can make better decisions. So now it's how do I take that reliable data and make sense of it? So we really think about it as a step of, we want to give people assistance to make decisions better. At some point in time, we'll have enough confidence in the assistant to go off and run and be a true agent. But we see the workflows we've built today begin to have more and more assistance integrated into the workflow. Now, our thought too isn't that, we're going to, wake up one day and have a massive reduction in workforce. The thinking is that, given the complexity of the world and the environment around us, we need to not continue to add headcount or add overhead to manage increasing levels of complexity. And so by getting people to work more efficiently, will help give them cycles to have the next level order of magnitude decision making that an agent couldn't be trained for. That's how we think about the application, especially given the type of work we're doing in supply chain. There's a lot of critical thinking, and there's a lot of senior level people. Those 3,000 that manage the supply chain are managing, again, a network of 30,000 plus people that build and ship product. And so there's a higher level order of work that's happening in the supply chain organization itself. They're not very transactional roles, right?
Yeah. Another set of questions look at the way you organize your activities. So your organization is in charge of a very complex supply chain. You have really 4 supply chains, many contract manufacturers. And we talked about the fact that automated testing really comes from Cisco to the CMs.
Yes.
Now, one approach is to say we have so much complexity that we want to keep everything separate and to let it evolve. Another approach is to say, let's kind of build on economies of scale. We build the technology, let's scale it up across multiple supply chains, but maybe they are too different from each other. So how do you think about the trade-off between developing knowledge and evolving that knowledge across different parts of the organization versus centralizing the knowledge?
Yeah, it's great question. That's the classic central, distributed type of organization structure. I would say that we are absolutely a distributed decision-making organization, right? We've got a dedicated services supply chain team, component supply chain team, and we have each major function that's trying to drive excellence in planning, as an example. The balance is how do you take the best of those and drive sharing and learning across the teams, drive standardization where you need to, and then learning across the organizations. Again, that's kind of the core purpose of my function, is how do we think about, again, driving a common standard, let's say, to data cataloging and taxonomy. We all know we need data. I need services data to talk to quality data. I need quality data to talk to component data to talk to fulfillment data. They all are related to each other. So I'm not going to get pushback from each of the individual functional teams that we need a data cataloging, taxonomy, data ownership, data quality strategy, and that it doesn't make sense for each of them to go off and build their own, because they all understand the bigger picture and that we aren't going to be successful using data if we're all on different pages. And so it's an effort, right? Driving a consistent standard is an effort, and there's no one answer. But it's, for us, we would never go to either one extreme or the other. It's functional excellence, segmented excellence, with kind of maniacal focus on driving best practices across the teams.
A number of people would like you to talk about some of the things you regret. So you've had a wonderful journey so far, and hopefully in the future.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you'd have done differently had you kind of in hindsight?
Okay, one in particular is interesting. One is, I think about the data foundation. We didn't. If I go back to even as long as 10 years ago, we didn't have a clear data security strategy, data access and security management strategy. And so although, let's say, we're all using the same technology to house our data, we allowed functional teams to build their own data lake for planning, data lake for sourcing, data lake, right? And as a result of that, we ended up with the solution was to go build and wall off the data that planners need and only let planners see it, because the data might have been sensitive. It might have been, you don't want to give insights to everybody on like what you're predicting for shipment and revenue this quarter, right? It's insider information can be in some of this data, or something that's got a ton of IP in it. So instead of us actually solving for data level security and security at a role level in the data element level, we just created islands of data. That's something that I wish I could go back many years ago and start over, because it's kind of, I'm figuring out that I've got 50, 60 data objects that have been replicated that need to be unreplicated and APIs built. Or now we're trying to go back and create really better data level security. And so it's hard to go back and do it. Whereas the data architecture could have been done better up front, if that was kind of top of mind for us. Yeah.
Great. A number of questions focus on, how you structured that journey. And let me phrase it this way. You're fortunate to have literally hundreds of potential applications. And we talked about kind of the use of maturity and how close we are to machine learning to decide where to progress.
Right.
How do you incorporate into that analysis the potential return on investment and the potential for learning, right? So you have maturity, the more mature the application, the less maybe you're going to learn from implementing it, and you have to incorporate the return on investment. How do you trade off these different factors?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I mean, that's always the big question: is where do you put the investment? How do you calculate ROI? I would say that it's a mix of both. You've got to experiment, and you saw with the use case progression. There's things that are POC experimentation. We carve out dollars every year, a sizable amount of money as well, just to do experimentation, to feed teams the data, give them access to algorithms, new and late-breaking software, third-party applications, so that we can stay current. So experimentation is always part of it. We also do innovation challenges in regions and different functions to try to harvest ideas, and we seed fund those things, like a Shark Tank type of approach, right? We do those internally. But ultimately, like where you want to make the investment comes down to, we look at factors like how many people are involved, like how many people will this decision-making use case impact? The fulfillment organization, or the fulfillment example, is a good example of that. There's hundreds of people that are managing that backlog every day. So if we can help those people marginally, it's times hundreds of time that we get back, right? Then you start to think about things like, okay, virtual failure analysis. If I can get better at predicting why things failed and not have to actually do the failure analysis physically, I can learn so much quicker, or maybe detect something that is in my customer's install base. Huge value, customer sat, quality, cost, right? And so again, by us kind of getting that visibility to what's happening cross-functionally and bubbling up all of those use cases, it gives us the ability to say, man, like that one has promise. We need to invest in the data foundation, the resources. Let's get that thing working, right? But that's how we think about it. What is it? Can you tie it back to your core metrics? People efficiency, can you tie it to cost, quality, delivery, speed to product launch, speed to yield, right? That's how we have to make the connection.
Terrific. We have so many additional questions in so little time. So I think we really have to stop here, almost stop here. So Joe, this has been a fascinating journey, and I'm sure each of us can learn a lot from Cisco's experience. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to hand it back to Barchi for a few final remarks. Barchi.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Haim, and many thanks to Joe for a very informative discussion. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's event. To share your feedback, please take a moment to complete our brief post-event survey, which you can access using the QR code displayed on the screen. Our speaker series will be pausing for the summer. To stay informed about future sessions and other activities of the Value Chain Innovation Initiative, we encourage you to sign up for our mailing list by visiting our website via the link displayed on the right. You can also find on this website the recordings of all past events. And with that, we conclude today's event. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you in future events.